Hello all, and another walk home, so another video. So today's video I wanted to address something that's come up time and again in the comment sections of my videos, and that is a distinct difference between the Irish relationship with the European Union and the relationship of our nearest British neighbours. This, especially under the category of exercising sovereignty. I often hear in the circles of those who oppose the European Union, particularly those from the United Kingdom, that they cannot understand how the Irish had fought for sovereignty and for independence from British rule for so long, only to so-called hand it over to the rule of Brussels a couple of generations later. This stems from the fact that the Irish mentality towards sovereignty on the whole is very different to how our cousins over in the United Kingdom view it. In particular under several key areas. Firstly, Ireland has a completely different view with regards to what sovereignty means. For us, sovereignty is the idea of us making choices for ourselves and living by those choices. Being able to decide what is good for our countries and running with it, and changing that decision should need arise. But trying to work within the constitutes of decisions that we have previously made. It is not about us exercising power. It's not about us pushing our own weight around. And it's not about us being pushed around by others. It's about compromise. In particular, we see this through the lens of our past, which was our relationship with Britain, and our struggle for independence, the economic ties that tied us to the British Empire even after that, and the fact that we had to be always worried up until the time that we joined the European Union, or at that time it was the European Economic Area, that we had to be very, very concerned over the fact that at any stage our bigger neighbour could interfere either directly or indirectly with how we did things. Being part of the EU and the EEC before that was a way of counterbalancing this. And so we saw it as an important step forward. That's the first. The second is that Ireland is a much smaller entity than the United Kingdom, with much deeper different concerns. The idea of cooperation and working with partners is very much a part of who we are, even when it came to our struggles for independence. One of the reasons why we continuously failed to gain independence in the centuries before the 20th century was because that we couldn't figure out how to work well amongst ourselves. We couldn't get organised, or you'd have one part of the country rising, whereas other parts of the country kept their heads down. This happened repeatedly and was manipulated very much so by outsiders. When it comes to our independence, we managed to gain it partially because we cooperated with each other and cooperated with outsiders, and particularly the United States, to put pressure on the then British government to allow us regional autonomy first, under Dominion status, and then later to become a republic. So this idea of cooperation is kind of inbuilt into our system, for good or for bad. And so we see no problem really with cooperating with the EU and with our partners in the EU. We see it as just a natural fit for us. We see it as a way of, as I said before, counterbalancing the influence of Britain in our politics, but also a way of us having influence on in regards to larger affairs across the whole of Europe. That's the second part of it, is that we don't see cooperation in the same ways as the British do, where cooperation is sometimes, due to the fact that Britain was an empire and basically ruled the roost for a long time, cooperation is seen as a weakening of the British position in the world in some cases, whereas in Ireland it's seen as gaining key friends and allies to make the world a better place, both for Irish people and for others. That's the second. The third is regards to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has had a very large effect on how the Irish see themselves. In particular, in the last couple of decades, people like myself lived through the Troubles. Myself, for example, I lived through the latter stages of it, and I still remember it quite well, and it has left a very large mark on our political system. Not so much that there was fighting going on the streets of Dublin, but the fact that it was prominent in the news and in the and reports of various attacks and terrible events taking place just across the border in the north. Yes, there were several events that took place here in Dublin as well, and across the rest of Ireland, but also events that took place in the UK, which damaged Irish-UK relations very fundamentally, that have only really started to recover in the last decade or so. So we don't want to go back to that. There's no way that we want to go back to that. And even though the younger generation might not have grown up in that environment, we still have the scars of that conflict very much near the surface in our society. So Northern Ireland is of key elements to our relationship with Europe, where we see Europe as a way of gaining more cooperation between ourselves and our cousins in the north, in particular over the whole Brexit issue and the whole the whole idea of the open border. We know full well from our history that if it was just ourselves negotiating with Britain and with the United Kingdom, we would have to probably accept border controls on the border between North and South, which could very well have led to another major conflict. By having allies in Europe who supported us and gave us the confidence to stand up and explain ourselves to the British in a more clear way, we did come to our maybe not a satisfactory conclusion for everybody's sake, but one that at least still maintains the peace. And so being part of the EU is seen as a positive thing in this regard. The next major factor which I would like to talk about is the economic situation. All right, the fact that we share a common currency with our EU partners means that economically we're becoming less dependent on Britain and more connected to the European markets, and in this way more connected to the world markets. Ireland by itself would not be able to negotiate very, very good trade deals with other parts of the world. Whereas being part of the EU and having an equal voice inside the EU would mean that we can negotiate fairly good trade deals which protect our own interests and our own markets. And the Mercosur trade deal with South America being a very good example of this, where Ireland, along with several other European countries, basically had major issues with regard to the agricultural component of that trade deal, and were able to negotiate a fairly good workaround that allowed Mercosur to go through, but yet protected our own internal markets. And okay, you can talk about protectionism all you like. The EU is a protectionist environment, but protectionism basically means maintaining your own jobs in your own country. And while the idea of having a free open borders, a free open markets, it might seem like a good idea, it does have some downsides to it too. And while I promote the idea of free trade, I do understand that you need to have some constraints with regards to certain industries. Otherwise, your own internal industries are going to fully collapse. So, sticking with the idea of the economic situation, the fact that the EU also put a lot of investment into Ireland with the structural funds, and particularly gave a lot of relief to our agricultural sector through CAP, indicates that we can rely on the EU to a certain degree to help us out if we get into trouble. Something which is blatantly obvious that we weren't able to do under British rule. Like, you only have to take a cursory glance at the Great Potato Famine from 1845 to about 1850, more or less, to see how mismanagement from Westminster caused that to become a catastrophic event for Irish culture and Irish people. If you compare that to not only the recent coronavirus outbreak, but also to the economic collapse in the 2010s, and how the EU helped out and supported Ireland, you can see that economically we're in a much better position inside the EU than out. Finally, and I think this is a core element, the Irish, as opposed to the British, even though we're both island nations, we are an island where migration out of Ireland was in the past, and continues to be to a certain degree in the present, a fundamental part of who we are. We have got cousins and neighbours, we have got cousins and people in our family, people we know, friends, who are scattered all over the planet. I have friends in Australia, I've got friends in the Americas, both north and south. I have friends in Europe, all over the place, even friends as far away as Taiwan and Korea, Japan, who are all Irish born, who all grew up with me or went to school with me or to university with me. This is a key element to why we are much more pro-EU, because this allows us greater access to our people to enter other jurisdictions and work and live and enjoy life there. And of course, it allows people to come here as well, which, yes, I know is something which upsets some people, but as I've said before, it's not a very large amount that have come here, and the people it upsets tends to be in a distinct minority as opposed to the majority of Irish people who don't really care. The migration issue means that we see the benefit of being part of larger organisations which allow us easy access to live in their jurisdictions and be part of their communities. and allow us to understand other people who come here better. And so, unlike the British who tend to be more stay-at-home types, because they didn't really need to leave unless they were really wanted to. They didn't really need to leave Britain to go to other places, and didn't really integrate with other places that well once they got there. Take, for example, British people who are living in the south of Spain. Ireland and the Irish are much more open to this integration and in migration fact. Being part of the EU helps facilitate that. And even before we joined the EU, there were already Irish communities living in what would later become the European Union. So it's mainly because of these elements that we are more pro-EU here than it would be in the UK. We don't associate the EU with the negativity that the UK does, with a loss of prestige, with a loss of power. We are associated with helping us out when we are in trouble, or being on our side when we need that little bit of support. And we also, of course, have much stronger connections, both with regards to migration patterns and with regards to, we'll say, even something as simple as holiday travel with the European Union than a lot of British people would have. So this is why the Irish tend to be a lot more positive with regards to the EU than the British do. Now, on saying that, there's a huge caveat at the end. It doesn't mean to say we don't see the flaws in the system. No system is perfect. The EU does need a good bit of renovation with regards to, for example, its democratic accountability, or with regards to migration policies, and of course the whole idea of neutrality, which is central to Irish identity, is a big issue as well. But on the whole, when you balance the two sides, we tend to be a lot more pro than anti. And after seeing what has happened with Brexit, with the UK, you can understand why we would be very reticent to leave the European Union anytime soon. Rightio, have a nice day. Bye now.